Sequence of return risks are real, my friends. I know it's academic and a lot of people, yeah, they say sequence of returns, they get it, but it is real. And if you're near retirement or just recently retired, if you're not thinking about this, you're freaking nuts, dude. I implore you to lock in some gains while you can, because those gains can be fleeting. And if they go away, you're going to be wishing you locked in gains. I know the answer is, but Josh, the markets always come back. Oh, my goodness. We don't know that for the future. We have no clue. And secondly, all right, so locking in gains doesn't mean you're out of the markets. It means you're taking some risk off the table. So let's go into this from Fidelity. Shows us a perfect example of sequence of return risks. You got two 40 years old. All right, one's getting bad returns on the front end of his 25-year investments. One's getting good returns on the front year of his 20-year investments, 25-year investments. All right, so 40-year-old Josh is getting great returns on the front end. 40-year-old Bob is getting bad returns on the front end. Now, notice we both end up the same place. All right, so after, I guess, 20 years or so, Bob starts getting good returns, Josh starts getting bad returns. But notice we still end up at the same place because it doesn't matter. We're not taking any money out while we're accumulating. So I'm still accumulating. I'm still putting my assets in VTI. I do have Wellington as my big account now as opposed to all VTV because I want to protect the downside. My money that's accumulating, I'm just putting in VTI. VTI is a total stock index, by the way, for those of you who are wondering. All right, so now we're 65 years old. We're both sitting on the same amount of money. All right, Josh, though, starts with bad years in retirement. Yeah, boom. Bob, though, has good years in retirement. Yeah, kaboom. So I'm getting smoked. He's loving life. He's eating caviar and, I don't know, living in freaking Martha's Vineyard with Obama. Worried about climate change and ocean rises, but I'm going to buy a house in Martha's Vineyard. Kind of weird. But here I am. I'm eating ramen noodles. Oh, actually, I'm not because I still have Social Security and I still have a house that's paid for, but be that as it may. You see how Bob is freaking loving it, even though he had bad return. He had good returns on the front end of retirement. I had bad returns on the front end of retirement, even though we started the same place. We had the same annual rate of return. Portfolio A experienced positive returns early in retirement, grows over time. Portfolio B that experienced negative returns early ran out of money. Yep, each portfolio experiences the same annual returns. Exactly. So that's sequence of return risk. And I'll leave a link to this PDF if you want to look at it. All right. So what are some of the risks we have to contend with? Right here. This freaking concerns me. Boeing, Exxon, Apple join Western firms spurning Russia over Ukraine. Now, thankfully, Sniffy Joe isn't so idiotic to put a no-fly zone over Ukraine like the stupid Zelensky was asking for. There's an easy way out of this freaking conundrum. It's just tell NATO to stop their eastward expansion. Like we said when the fall of the USSR came. We said we won't go an inch eastward. Somehow we've been backing, going off on our promises there, but hey, that doesn't matter. And then on top of that, what happened in 2014 with a democratically elected government in Ukraine? Oh, I'll let you figure that one out. So we let's just say we got involved where we shouldn't have been, and then we've gone against our promise that we will not expand NATO, and now Zelensky is asking to be part of the EU. It's freaking insane, man. So the easiest way to get rid of all this is to say we won't expand NATO into Ukraine. Done and done. Move on. We're done here. But we're not doing that because now we have too much pride at stake, and as such, we got to stick it to Putin once and for all to show him who's boss. So now we have companies, Boeing, Exxon, Apple, joining Western firms spurning over Russia over Ukraine. Ford suspends operations. Apple stops iPhone sales. ESG investors press Western firms to act. And ESG is controlled by BlackRock, who are controlled by the globalists in the World Economic Forum. Airbus stops sending spare parts to Russia and supporting Russian airlines. U.S. tech, I mean, this whole thing is nuts. This is a freaking trade. They're always worried about Trump with trade war. This right here is a war economically. And it's I tell you, man, there's no good way out of this. We're not sending missiles over there yet. Could we? Certainly, man. Economic sanctions, it kills innocent people. Harming innocent children had nothing to do with this. And we cause it, man. Oh, how dare you say that? Don't expand NATO. This is all done. All done. You don't want war. Don't expand NATO. We are done here. But the problem is, don't people see behind just 2 days ahead? The China and Russia collusion is growing rapidly by the day. by the day. Both countries have huge demographic problems, by the way. And as such, they're colluding in order to expand while the getting's good, because 100 years from now, both those countries could be a hell of a lot smaller than they are now, 50 years from now even. So what happens when China and Russia, now Russia's economy isn't huge, but China's certainly is. What happens when they join forces economically? What does that do to the United States economically? Just think about this, man. Europe is dead. It's a dying enterprise. I mean, look, Germany's still it's still an economy. I get it. It's not today, but Europe we can't just rely on Europe. And so this is bad for economic growth. Bad, bad, bad. All self-inflicted, by the way. So what happens? Well, people are always going to say, well, Josh, in World War, right here, in World War II, the markets did great. So any kind of war won't hurt us, because look, in World War II, we had a 0.75%, 11%, 6%, 1%, 2%, 8, 14, 8. So from the 1940s, we had a great returns. We only had one down year, and that's it was only 1.2%. So we kicked butt and took names in the 1940s, during and after World War II. And then we go to the 50s. Oh, wait, that's inflation. Excuse me. I don't want inflation. I want right here, returns. Right here. So here's the war. Right here. -9, -9. Then we kick when we were starting the tide return in 21, 23, 19, 39. Negative, positive, and another positive, a huge positive. So huge rates of return during World War II. The first couple years were bad. After that, woo, nada. Katie bar the door, right? 34, 23. That's the S&P 500, by the way. What's the difference between this and where we are today? The previous decade, negative, huge positive, negative, huge positive, negative, is a Great Depression. We'd made no money in the 30s, none. There's no gains in the 30s. So the 1940s, not only did we get back the gains we lost in the 1930s, but because the war was over and we were the only game left in town, we had a thriving economy. The U.S. is dominating the world. So let's go down to right now. Where are we at today? Oh, let's take a look here. 2009, gain. One loss. Gain. That's some serious singing right there. So we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years out of 13 of significant growth. Significant growth with low inflation. We're not. Do you see the difference between the war years of the 1940s and the potential economic war years of the 2020s? Do you see the difference? We're coming off massive amounts of gains, massive amounts of low inflation. A little bit different. Let's go to the 70s, the Vietnam time. Oh, wait a second. 1966, negative. From 1966 to 1982, basically the Vietnam times and the OPEC sanctions and the insanity that was going on in the world, we had no growth in the S&P 500, none. And yet we had high inflation. So don't give me your war times are good for growth. They're good for growth in 1940s because we were coming off the Great Depression. And when I say good for growth, people died. Economies were collapsed. Women were left without a husband. Children were left without a dad. That's in the United States. Never mind what happened in Europe, man. We were the only game in town. To compare the war years of those years to what could be coming down the pike now is freaking nuts. If you're not preparing for sequence of return risk and you're about to retire, I don't know what to tell you, man. Look, I wish I had your level of optimism. I don't. Now, I will tell you, too, by the way, let's just look at Wellington, for example. And we've done this before. All right, so let's go to Wellington. Yeah, if I don't know if I want to take the highway pause. Let's go Wellington from the 1930s S&P 500 to the I don't want to go to the 1930s. I want to go to the 1940s. So let me actually make this a little bit less so you can see right there. Yeah, let me make it a little bit bigger. All right, so we're going to go to, I just move that over a little bit. Hey, sweet, I can. Hey, look at that. I didn't know I could do that. Yay for that. Yay for Josh. All right, cool. Let's, actually, we don't want any income need. Blink, 0. Blink. There we go. All right. So here's the S&P 500. We got 100,000. Oh, I got to do 100,000 in Wellington as well. Blink, 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 right there. All right, sweet. All right, so here's S&P 500 in 1930s. Up to 1939, it was worth 124. Wellington was worth 126. All right, so a 10-year increment of the deflationary years, Wellington did better because bonds did better during deflation. I've said that 1,000 times a Sunday. Here's the S&P 500 during the war and post-war years. 100,000 grew to. Let's go to. Actually, let's do this. Let's start with 1940. All right, there we go. 1940, 100,000 to 1949 grew to 238. 100,000 in Wellington grew to 234. Not too shabby, if I do say so myself. So, did you lose a little bit of money in Wellington relative to the S&P 500? Yes, not very much. All right, so let's go to the 1950s, and here's where the S&P 500 smoked the Wellington. Right here, 19. This is the post-war scenario, which I don't know if anyone's going to think we're going to be there again. But here, 1950 to 1960, we'll just say 594 for the S&P 500, 318 for Wellington. So do you really think we're going to an era of peace like the 1950s, prosperity, where we were the only game in town? I don't. So, but even if we were, even then, the Wellington still tripled its money over that decade with the S&P 500, 6 times its growth. I'll take that, man. If I'm about ready to retire, if that's the worst case I get, I'll take that 100%. Point being is, if you're about ready to retire, you cannot afford a sequence of return risk a la 2000, 2001 and 2, a la October 2007 to March 9th of 2009, a la 1973, 74. You just can't. You got to avoid this stuff at all costs. If that means you're leaving them a little bit less to your kids, well, so be it, man. You can always buy insurance if that's what you want, life insurance. Get a term policy, for heaven's sake, they're cheap. All right, love to hear your thoughts. We'll see you.